My channel started a few years ago with 10 videos, each one about a film in the Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers series. I feel a little sheepish about some things I said in those original videos, and though I stand by everything I had said, I wouldn't necessarily say those things the same way today, but because sometimes people actually do watch these videos.
Well, thanks very much.
But despite the internet's obsession with ranking everything, I've only seen one YouTuber ranking Fred and Ginger films, the very well-informed Drive-In Movie History, who also ranks dance numbers from across cinema history. He did a poll that garnered a modest number of replies, not nearly as much as deserved. He and I also differ pretty radically on our opinions, especially around the bottom of the list. And that's the fun part of fandom. You love the same things, and for different reasons. So, I'm gonna go for it. The Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers films, worst to best, in my opinion. Number 10, Barkley of Broadway. I'll be brief here. This is the only one of the Astaire Rogers films I genuinely dislike. It was the duo's unexpected reunion 10 years after their RKO musicals, and it stands apart from the rest by being in color and being a marriage drama with some comedy just tossed in. Barkley's does have a couple of great dance numbers, and great piano playing by Oscar Levant, but for me the plot only gets interesting about an hour in, and there's a couple scenes that I find genuinely painful to watch. I really only turn to this movie every few years to see if my opinion has changed. So far, it has not. Okay, that's over. My apologies to those who love that film. Number 9, Flying Down to Rio. It says something about these films that my second ranking from the bottom is a movie that I rewatch excessively. The plot is dumb, and the finale with women being tossed around on propeller planes is absurd. But Flying Down to Rio still entertains. This was the first movie that cast Fred and Ginger together, so the studio really didn't know what they had yet. It's their only film as presumably platonic friends, co-workers in a jazz swing band. The two need more screen time, and following this first outing, they got it. When they're together, the movie is a blast. It's all ridiculously lightweight, but you could say that about a couple of their best films as well. Number 8, The Story of Vernon and Irene Castle. The heaviest film that Fred and Ginger ever did, this biographical movie has some really fine points. A tragic ending, great supporting actors in Walter Brennan, Edna Mae Oliver, and Lou Fields. The showcase of old dance crazes is a complete change from the choreography that you'd expect in any other Astaire Rogers movie. But so is everything else. It starts a little too goofy for me, and then gets pretty dark as World War I looms over everyone. I actually rewatched this less than Flying Down to Rio, though it's certainly a better film. It's just that, like Barkley's of Broadway, it's not usually what I go to for my Fred and Ginger fix. So as an aside, what is that Fred and Ginger formula? Well, in a gross oversimplification of their film series, it's this. Fred falls for Ginger and annoys her, but he charms her anyways. There's a misunderstanding. They have sidekicks, often an idiot best friend, a saucy older woman, and somebody sexually ambiguous. A tuxedo must be worn, possibly the only crossover with my other obsession, James Bond. There are several great dance numbers, climaxing with a big showpiece. Often Fred gets a solo number. Frequently they go to an exotic location. Rio, Venice, Brighton, Paris, New Jersey. Happy ending. A lot of that has become rom-com norm, but there's a flavor to a Fred and Ginger rom-com that's very specific, and that's due not just to the talent and comic timing of the two leads, but also to repeat secondary characters like Edward Everett Horton, Eric Blore, and Helen Broderick, among others. The fact is, though, nearly half of their films don't really fit that description, but Astaire and Rogers themselves were well aware of the formula, and they wanted to escape it to do other kinds of films, and they eventually did. Anyhow, back to the list. Number 7, Carefree. Another outlier, this time a screwball comedy starring Ginger. The bottom end of this list is full of outliers. Ginger is really funny in this psychiatric rom-com full of hypnosis and slapstick. So is Luella Gear. You can't take the story seriously for even a second, which is good. The songs, however, don't really reach the heights of their earlier films, with the exception of Change Partners. Carefree is light on dance numbers, with the slow-mo I Used to Be Colorblind and the would-be showstopper The Yam being standouts. Their last few films, Follow the Fleet, Carefree, and Vernon Irene Castle, were each trying new spins on the old formula. Each works in its own way. This one offers madcap action and more Ginger Rogers than usual, but it's more screwball comedy than musical, so again, it doesn't quite check every box for me. Number 6. Roberto. Several standout scenes highlight this slightly disjointed early comedy, which follows some rustic Hoosiers thrust into the French fashion industry. Fred and Ginger are having a fantastic time here, and they take us along with them for the ride. Their chemistry is off the charts. Many of the songs are absolute classics. I Won't Dance, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, Hard to Handle. The downside, well, fashion show sequences that may or may not appeal to you. The main plot, which follows Randolph Scott and Irene Dunn as a rich, connected lug and his much classier employee, who turns out to be a princess, is not terribly exciting. I said in my earlier video that Dunn and Scott have no chemistry, but I would update that to say they aren't really given much to work with, which I would not say of the A-story couples in Follow the Fleet or even Flying Down to Rio. Yikes, am I talking myself into ranking Flying Down to Rio even higher? Top half of the list. Number 5, Follow the Fleet. As a kid, this was the movie that made me fall in love with Fred and Ginger. It's just so goofy, and the songs rule. Even a throwaway like We Joined the Navy. Let's Face the Music and Dance is one of their best dance duets. Ginger Rogers is hilarious in this film, and Lucille Ball is too in a tiny role. The downside, the emotional weight of the film rests on Harriet Hilliard and Randolph Scott. Hilliard tries to up her sex appeal to catch Randolph Scott's lovable cad, but you just don't buy into them being a necessary couple, even less than Scott and Dunn and Roberta. Just like in Flying Down to Rio, Fred and Ginger somehow turn their funny B story into what you really want to be watching. Well, not somehow. It's all talent, hard work, and comic timing. Number 4, Shall We Dance? While flawed, Shall We Dance edges above Follow the Fleet for a couple reasons. The plot is epic, whereas Follow the Fleet keeps itself confined to a couple weekends in San Francisco. Shall We Dance follows a couple of celebrities and their struggles with tabloids. It has a couple of Fred and Ginger's best dances in it. They All Laughed and Let's Call the Whole Thing Off. And it features the final pairing of Eric Blore and Edward Everett Horton. If you enjoy Miracle on 34th Street, seeing Jerome Cohen here in a completely different role it's a pretty cool performance. The movie is wildly creative, even if that's also one of its weak points. The masks and mannequin and flipbooks are a little weird, but it's hard not to get invested in the plot, which is genuinely touching, in a way only seen in Vernon and Irene Castle, and my upcoming predictable number 1 pick. Number 3, The Gay Divorcee. In many ways, the Goldfinger of Fred and Ginger movies, this one is the one that sets the formula for the rest. Fred is smitten with Ginger, wacky misunderstandings.
Chance is the fool's name for fate.
I'll be waiting for you in my room, 216 at midnight.
Phenomenal dance sequences, racy innuendos.
When you're near, I feel so, let's play housey.
Beginning to sense that.
Funny sidekicks. The best Horton and Blore pairing imaginable. It's all extremely silly, and he goes for the silly with gusto. Extra points for the Continental, which is a colossal dance number, and for Eric Rhodes just being hilarious in every scene. Actually, mentioning Gay Divorcee, there's one other feature of the Fred and Ginger formula I didn't mention earlier: costumes. Yeah, there's the ubiquitous tuxedos, but Ginger Rogers' costumes are remarkable. In 3 of their 10 films, her costumes are even a plot point.
Bart is Mrs. Adam. What would you wear?
Fig leaves?
But even when unmentioned, they deserve a pause and applause. Number 2, Top Hat. Probably the most perfect movie Fred and Ginger ever did. Top Hat checks every single box like Gay Divorcee did, and adds Helen Broderick on top of all of that. The movie's Venice is maybe a little less believable than Gay Divorcee's Brighton, but there's a feeling of effervescence that pervades this film, so it fits perfectly.
Gentlemen, we take all the blame, myself.
It's really just a simple comedy of errors, but everything, the dances, the songs, the humor, is perfection. Isn't It a Lovely Day to Be Caught in the Rain is certainly my favorite of their upbeat dance numbers, tied only with the 2 classic dances in my number 1. Number 1, Swing Time. Maybe it's not a perfect film, but it's the one that kicks me hard in the feels and still has a solid sense of humor. Like Shall We Dance, this movie takes its time and it gets you invested in the fates of its two leads. A gambler and a dance instructor fall in love and rise to fame, while the gambler tries to avoid going home to marry his rich fiancée. When I saw this at age 9, I instinctively felt Joseph Campbell's hero's journey unfolding. It goes beyond rom-com and achieves the level of American myth. There's also a sense of impending doom that imbues the funny dialogue with weight. Like the humor is a life raft for this couple who are desperately in love and cannot work out their problems, even when they're riding high. And it has absolutely two of the best dances by Astaire and Rogers, Pick Yourself Up and Never Gonna Dance. The first is Sweetness and Light. The latter is Heartbreak. The RKO Astaire and Rogers films took two young performers, a hoofer from a disbanded brother-sister act and a sexy B-movie chorus girl, and it turned them into international superstars. There's something genuinely encouraging about seeing people rise above their expectations. Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt and Jennifer Garner getting recognized not just as pretty faces. Peter Jackson directing the juggernaut of all film trilogies when he had up to that point been mostly doing gross-out horror comedies. So tracing Astaire and Rogers from Flying Down to Rio to Barkley's of Broadway is pretty inspiring. My take on which films work and which don't is entirely subjective, of course. I'm happy to see other people's rankings. Even better, drop them off at Drive-In Movie History.
Anything but the La Belle, a perfectly swell romance. Never gonna dance, never gonna dance, only gonna love, never